The air in the private wing of the Los Angeles hospital was sterile, cool, and deceivingly quiet. The only persistent sound was the gentle, rhythmic beep 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 of the bedside monitor, a comforting sound I had come to associate with safety and professional vigilance. I was Eleanor Vance, an 82-year-old retired history professor, recuperating gracefully from a successful, if exhausting, hip replacement surgery. I was, by all accounts, enjoying the rare, luxurious stillness of enforced rest. The large, soundproofed window offered a spectacular, twinkling view of the sprawling city lights, yet it was the sight inside the room that turned the night into a nightmare. My son, Ethan, usually a beacon of restless, high-stakes energy from the crypto world, stood utterly still beside my four-pole, his silhouette tense and unnatural against the silver moonlight filtering through the vertical blinds. He wasn't holding the usual scheduled bag of fluids or the pain medication pump. In his hand, he gripped a large, clear syringe. It was filled not with a familiar dose of antibiotics or nutrient solution, but a murky, milky cocktail, a lethal, undetectable blend of pulverized sleeping pills mixed with saline, a solution designed to mimic a routine sedative and plunge me into a final, irreversible sleep. In that silent, terrifying fraction of a second, as I watched his hand move toward the injection port on the tubing leading directly to my veins, I understood the monstrous truth. The same hand that once held mine so sweetly was now poised to deliver my death sentence. The initial terror was immediately overwhelmed by a sickening, profound realization that his catastrophic failure in the world of high-risk crypto venture capitalism and the relentless pressure of $6 million in debt had finally driven him to this ultimate, desperate act of patricide. This was not a plea for help. This was a desperate, cold-blooded maneuver for the inheritance he needed to survive. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel and press that bell icon so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. The foundation of the Vance fortune was built on prudence and patience, the antithesis of the world Ethan later embraced. My late husband, Harold, a meticulous real estate attorney, specialized in handling high-value coastal properties in Santa Monica and Brentwood. He didn't invest in volatile tech or stocks, he invested in Earth. Over 30 years, through conservative buying and strategic development, he amassed a portfolio of rental properties and prime land holdings, eventually valued conservatively at over $12 million. When Harold passed away a decade ago, he explicitly structured our entire estate, the full $12 million net worth, into the Vance Family Irrevocable Trust. Harold's primary goal was to protect me, an 82-year-old widow, from predatory financial schemes and to ensure I could live comfortably without managing assets. The trust documents were ironclad and brutally clear. I retained the comfortable income stream and absolute control over the principal as the primary beneficiary, but the trust principal assets were legally non-transferable and could only be liquidated and distributed to the secondary beneficiary, Ethan, after my death and the subsequent probate process, which mandated a minimum 90-day waiting period to manage taxes and final affairs. This meant that while I lived, the money was untouchable. Ethan, 45, the only child, saw this conservative structure as an infuriating roadblock to his rapid acquisition of wealth. He had plunged into the frenetic, high-octane world of cryptocurrency and NFT venture capital. He founded a highly leveraged, paper-thin fund called Aurora Digital Assets, chasing astronomical returns in the most illiquid corners of the Web3 space. His life became a performance, the leased Bentley, the panoramic penthouse views in downtown LA, rent paid on borrowed funds, the nonstop travel, and the aggressive, showy presence at every relevant global tech conference. This facade of success was entirely debt-fueled and relied on the continued influx of high-risk investor capital. The entire fragile edifice crumbled 6 weeks prior. Aurora Digital Assets had taken a massive, leveraged position in a high-profile, but ultimately unstable decentralized finance, DeFi, protocol. When the protocol was targeted by a sophisticated exploit leading to a catastrophic smart contract failure and instantaneous collapse of the token price, the market liquidations were swift and devastating. Ethan lost not only his firm's operating capital, but also wiped out over $8 million in investor funds. His primary creditor was the merciless Blackstone Capital Hedge Fund, managed by the infamous and exacting Vincent Thorne. Thorne didn't sue for the full $8 million, only the $6 million he needed to close his own quarter's losses, and his ultimatum was delivered with chilling clarity. Deposit the $6 million, wire by wire, into a specified escrow account within 72 hours, or face a double-pronged public destruction. Thorne promised to expose Ethan to the SEC for alleged misrepresentation of asset security and simultaneously launch a civil lawsuit that would not only seize every legitimate asset Ethan possessed, but also utterly destroy his reputation, guaranteeing a lifetime banishment from the financial sector and likely leading to criminal fraud charges. Ethan was cornered. His remaining legal assets, his car, a few token shares, amounted to less than $50,000. He quickly realized that the only source of liquidity large enough to save him was the Vance family irrevocable trust. But the prerequisite for access was my death, and the timeline was now measured in hours, not weeks. My recent hospitalization for a hip replacement at Cedars-Sinai, a major but busy hospital, provided the grotesque opportunity. It was the perfect storm: high-stress environment, continuous floor access, and limited individual nurse supervision. He viewed my foreline, meant to sustain my successful recovery, as the single, clean, and untraceable path to his financial salvation. Ethan struck at 3:30 a.m., timing his arrival precisely for the Valley of the Night, that perilous, vulnerable gap between the graveyard shift and the early morning shift change, when vigilance is at its lowest ebb. His preparation had been meticulous, calculated with the same cold, analytical precision he once applied to his market trades. Over the previous day, he had leveraged his remaining contacts to secure a highly concentrated, fast-acting barbiturate powder designed to induce respiratory failure that could easily be masked as a sudden, age-related complication following major surgery. He had spent hours in a sterile hotel bathroom, crushing the pills into an ultra-fine powder, suspending the resulting white sediment in a syringe filled with pharmaceutical-grade saline solution. The milky, opaque color was intentional. It needed to look like an antibiotic slurry or a high-concentration painkiller being administered. He wore hastily procured, ill-fitting surgical scrubs stolen from an unlocked laundry bin at an off-site medical building, and a crudely laminated ID badge he'd printed himself, reading NP Vance, Anesthesiology Consult. He approached the nursing station, his internal panic masked by an artificial veneer of professional exhaustion. He mumbled something about checking patient sedation levels for the 4 a.m. transfer assessment and slipped past the lone, drowsy unit clerk without challenge. He entered my private room, the heavy door closing with a controlled thud that echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. The subtle fluorescence of the 4-pole's digital screen cast his face in a sickly green light. I was awake, having just emerged from a shallow, medication-induced doze, but my body felt like lead, a common side effect of the post-operative pain management. I could see, but I could not shout. I could think, but I could not move. I was a terrified prisoner within my own skin, forced to watch the horror unfold. Ethan moved with an unnerving combination of professional swiftness and underlying tremor. He ignored my face and went straight for the machine. "Just checking your vitals, Mom," he whispered, the sound a dry, emotionless rasp. He did not ask how I was. He did not touch my hand. He only focused on the plastic tubing snaking from the bag, above down to the catheter in my forearm. He unsnapped the protective cap of the sterile injection port, his fingers fumbling the first time. The mechanical sound of the plastic snapping echoed in my ears like a gunshot. He pulled the cap off the syringe. I could clearly see the dense, swirling white cocktail, the lethal sludge that would plunge me into a coma and then death. As he steadied his hand, taking a deep, ragged breath, poised to puncture the port, he leaned in close, his face millimeters from mine, his eyes vacant and bloodshot. The words he whispered were not an apology or a confession, but a cold, desperate act of self-justification, confirming the financial ruin that had driven him to patricide. "Thorne is coming for everything, Mom. Not just the $6 million, but the firm, my house, my life, They'll put me away for a decade. I've tried everything, but the trust is the only liquidity. I need the 90-day probate to buy me time to clean up the accounts. This is the only way out for me. The only way. Don't worry. It'll just feel like a deep sleep. Goodbye." His finger tightened on the syringe plunger, and he began to push the needle toward the rubber port, ready to deliver the final dose. My silent scream was a trapped, unbearable pressure in my chest. As Ethan's finger pressed down on the plunger, and the tip of the needle punctured the foreport, and a horrifying pressure built in my paralyzed chest, I had no physical recourse. My throat was locked, my limbs immobile. All that remained was my mind, and I used it to launch a silent, desperate, fervent prayer. It was less a structured plea and more a primal, raw cry to the only certainty I had ever held. "Lord, save me. Not my money, not my life, but your will be done. Save me from this evil." The desperation was so profound it felt like a physical wrenching in my soul. At that exact, terrifying moment, just as the tip of the syringe engaged the rubber port, the raw terror was suddenly, instantaneously muted. A wave of intense, inexplicable warmth and profound peace washed over me, a physical sensation that felt like being enveloped in a strong, protective shield. It eclipsed the fear and the physical constraints, flooding my spirit with a clear, gentle conviction. I am the resurrection and the life. Hold on. It was an answer, sharp and undeniable, a promise delivered in the face of imminent death. Meanwhile, 2 floors down, Dr. Marcus Riel, the renowned orthopedic surgeon, was meticulously checking his notes before heading to his car. A man of quiet, unwavering faith and legendary professional diligence, he never left the hospital until every last detail of his patient's care was confirmed. Dr. Riel's internal clock was set on getting home to his family before dawn. He had already signed out on my case, satisfied with the successful hip replacement and smooth post-operative vitals. As he reached the elevator, Dr. Riel experienced something utterly foreign to his rational, scientific mind. An intense, overwhelming urge, a clear, undeniable, and persistent nudge that felt like a powerful hand pressing on his shoulder to return. The thought was specifically tied to Eleanor Vance, room 403. He tried to rationalize it away. Eleanor is stable. The resident is competent. Go home. But the feeling was an irresistible imperative, an anxious certainty that something was dangerously wrong. Ignoring his exhaustion and his carefully planned departure, Dr. Riel abruptly reversed course, walking with a quickened, almost panicked stride. He took the emergency stairs 2 at a time, bypassing the slow elevator. The closer he got to the 4th floor private wing, the more acute the feeling became, not of medical worry, but of sheer, unadulterated spiritual alarm. When he reached the corridor, the silence was oppressive, the lone nurse at the station nearly nodding off. The sight of my private room door, slightly ajar and casting a thin shadow into the empty hall, instantly galvanized him. He didn't think, he simply acted, driven by the powerful intuition he was now convinced was a command. He raced the final few yards toward room 403, his heart pounding not from exertion, but from the sudden, inexplicable certainty that he was about to intercept a tragedy. Dr. Riel hit the door at a full run, his shoulder slamming the heavy wood, sending it careening inward with a deafening bang that reverberated down the quiet hallway and utterly destroyed the stillness of the dark room. ID yourself. What are you injecting? Step away from the patient now. The doctor's voice, usually a calm, low baritone, was a booming, authoritative roar that felt like a physical strike against Ethan's ears. Ethan froze rigid, his entire body locked in a primal state of terror, the mask of the professional completely shattered. He stared wide-eyed at Dr. Riel, the syringe shaking uncontrollably in his hand. The sudden, violent interruption caused his finger to reflexively convulse on the plunger. A minuscule portion of the deathly white fluid, a fraction of a milliliter, was ejected not into the 4 tubing, but spurting out and splashing uselessly onto the matte silver casing of the 4 poles pump mechanism. It was the single, sickening droplet of poison that sealed his fate, confirming his intent to the only witness who mattered. Dr. Riel. He tried to put something in my line. He's not staff. The words were agonizing to force out a choked, desperate rasp from my paralyzed throat, but they were sufficient. My silent scream had finally found a voice, weak but critical. Dr. Riel didn't waste a second engaging the imposter. His focus was singular, securing the patient's life. With the swift, decisive movements of a surgeon used to life and death crises, he crossed the few feet to the bedside, bypassing Ethan entirely. His hand clamped down instantly on the rubberized tubing just above the injection port, squeezing the line shut. Simultaneously, his other hand snapped a small, plastic safety clamp onto the line, sealing the venous access and preventing any possible further contamination. The mechanical snick of the clamp felt, to me, like the final click of a safe door closing on my life. The danger contained, Dr. Riel pivoted, his expression shifting from focused medical professional to protective combatant. "You're under arrest. Stay right there," he commanded, immediately activating the emergency call button on the wall panel. "Security, code 3. Illegal entry and assault, attempted poisoning, room 403. Repeat, attempted poisoning." Ethan, recognizing that the evidence, the syringe of poison, was the key to his immediate incarceration, made a desperate, feral move. Ignoring the doctor, his sole thought was flight. He tried to shove the bulky syringe into the shallow pocket of his stolen scrubs, the plastic instrument clattering clumsily against the phone he already had inside. He lunged away from the bed, aiming for the door, trying to barrel past Dr. Riel. But Dr. Riel was faster, his own movement a blur of protective instinct. The doctor intercepted Ethan's charge, using his solid frame not to tackle, but simply to obstruct the narrow path between the bed and the wall. Ethan, driven by pure panic and momentum, tripped on the heavy, rubberized base of the bed table which had been moved during his clandestine maneuver. He didn't just stumble, he went down hard, his entire body weight propelling him forward. His head, in a cruel and instantaneous act of poetic justice, struck the sharp, lower corner of the titanium force stand that Dr. Riel had just secured moments earlier. The heavy metal upright, the very tool that had been the conduit for my potential death, became the instrument of his downfall. The sickening, hollow crack of bone-striking metal was the last sound I heard before the room filled with the pounding footsteps of the responding security team. The syringe skittered across the polished floor, stopping inches from the foot of my bed, a final, cold piece of evidence. Ethan lay motionless on the floor, his body already slack. The room instantly transformed from a quiet patient sanctuary into a flashing, high-stakes crime scene. Uniformed hospital security personnel flooded the corridor, followed by 2 Los Angeles Police Department detectives summoned urgently by Dr. Riel's clear, detailed call. The first priority was the medical assessment of Ethan, who lay in a heap by the four-pole, his breath ragged and shallow. The trauma team arrived within minutes. Their urgent analysis confirmed the catastrophic internal damage, a massive subdural hematoma and deep cerebral contusions resulting from the blunt force trauma to the occipital region of his skull, where he had struck the titanium base of the force stand. The neurosurgical prognosis was immediate and definitive. Ethan had suffered non-recoverable brainstem trauma. The man who had been a whirlwind of high-stakes, leveraged ambition, a figure defined by his relentless desire to move money, was now instantly and eternally immobilized. He was stabilized and rushed to emergency surgery, but the outcome was grim and irreversible. Ethan Vance, the crypto magnate, was reduced to a shell, confined to a permanent vegetative state, breathing only with the aid of a machine. His cognitive function was zero. The calculating killer was replaced by a mere biological necessity, unable to speak, reason, or even recognize his surroundings. Meanwhile, the LAPD collected the critical evidence, the syringe. Forensic analysis confirmed it contained an extremely high concentration of ultra-fast-acting barbiturates, enough to induce irreversible respiratory depression and death in minutes, easily masked as a post-operative complication in an 82-year-old patient. The charge leveled against him was immediate and absolute, attempted first-degree murder. But the true justice, the cruel, flawless poetic symmetry, was found in the financial fallout. Ethan's crime was motivated by a desperate need to access the $12 million trust principal to settle his $6 million debt with the predatory Vincent Thorne. He needed my death to initiate the 90-day probate process, hoping that the interval would give him enough cover to clear his name. However, his instantaneous incapacitation meant that the legal fiction of Ethan Vance, the person, ceased to exist, replaced by the legal status of an incapacitated person. The courts immediately appointed a neutral, professional conservator to oversee the remaining assets of the incapacitated Ethan Vance. This conservatorship immediately activated the judgment from Blackstone Capital and Vincent Thorne. Since Ethan was alive, the Vance family irrevocable trust remained untouched, protected by my survival. Thorne, a man who never wasted a legal moment, moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, he secured a court order to liquidate every single remaining asset owned by Ethan Vance. This included the contents of his corporate accounts, the sale of his leased luxury vehicles, and the repossession of his downtown penthouse lease. The total liquidated value was estimated to be less than $100,000. This pittance barely covered the legal fees, leaving the gargantuan $6 million debt still active and completely unsecured. Ethan's lifelong ambition led him not to freedom, but to absolute, inescapable captivity, a silent prison in a specialized long-term care facility where he requires constant, expensive, non-recoverable care. The man who sought eternal life through $12 million is now kept alive only by machines, completely broke, still owing $6 million, and eternally trapped in a state of deep, irreversible sleep. The very silence he tried to impose on me became his own eternal, solitary reality. I am now fully recovered, stronger and more certain of my purpose than ever before. Dr. Riel simply called his action following a professional instinct, but I know it was more. It was a direct, life-saving act of divine intervention, a physical manifestation of the peace I had felt moments before. My story is not one of tragedy, but of profound, terrifying grace. I had to forgive Ethan. It was a long, painful road, but I learned that true spiritual freedom comes not from judging the betrayal, but from releasing the bitterness. The God who intervened and sent Dr. Riel taught me that faith is the only armor against the darkness of this world. His justice may not be what we expect, but it is always true. If you are struggling with unforgivable hurt or betrayal, know that holding onto the pain only gives power to the perpetrator. Choose to release the burden, find your own peace, and trust that there is a purpose and a powerful protective presence, even in your darkest hour. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light in the darkness. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.